I think it's true for most of us that we live in the midst of a lot of noise. I'm not thinking so much of sheer decibel volume, but constant distraction, constant pulling at our attention. This is the struggle that we have in our digital information age. And it's unique to us. Now, it's not that human nature has changed. People have always been sinners. People have always been distracted, prone to wander. But it is unprecedented how much noise we have to deal with. Not ambient noise of cars or trucks or animals, but the digital noise that comes at us, and if we're honest, that we often invite into our lives. Think about how some of us go about our days. You might wake up and your alarm goes off and there's noise. Maybe the first thing you do is check your phone, or maybe you listen to something as you're brushing your teeth and getting ready in the morning. Maybe you turn on the TV for some background noise as you get ready with your cup of coffee. And when you get in the car, you can turn on the radio there. You can listen to music. You can listen to talk radio, to sports talk. You can sync up with your phone and listen to music or Audible or a podcast. And throughout the day, you'll check, many of us, whatever your preferred social media app is, Facebook. Years ago, when all the parents got on Facebook, all the kids got off Facebook, or Twitter, or Instagram, or Snapchat, or TikTok, or whatever the kids are into. Constant bombardment of images, videos, information, opinions, controversies, hot takes. That's to say nothing of email. One study of email use in the workplace tracked the anonymous behavior of over 50,000 people in their offices. Half of the users were checking devices like email every 6 minutes or fewer. More than a third were checking email every 3 minutes. The most common average checking time for these people in the office was 1 minute. 2/3 of the users never had so much as an hour of uninterrupted time in the office, and the most common average longest time was only 20 minutes, whether by necessity or what we bring upon ourselves. Of course, it's not all bad. We're grateful for easy, efficient ways to communicate with people, grateful to connect with friends, and I like listening to music and listening to books on Audible and podcasts. Maybe you even go out and you listen to some good sermons. But as we live lives of constant noise, it's not any one thing, but the cumulative effect is often to stress us out, make us feel pressed for time, make us feel as if we're always behind, or we always have the fear of missing out, or we feel frazzled, stressed, anxious, constantly aware of what's going on in the world. And if you just look at what's going on in the world, it seems like always bad news. And that's not to mention all of the ways in which social media connects us with people and ideas and opinions that frustrate us. It used to be that you just wouldn't know those people and their opinions, and you'd be blissfully ignorant of what your great aunt or uncle or nephew or niece thought. But now we can all know what everyone thinks and be frustrated about it. And then we can respond to them and be their source of frustration. Constant noise, opinions, frazzled, anxious we are. I want you to put the noise away as best you can, even though some of you are feeling an urge right now. I haven't checked my phone in 30 minutes, and some of you, truth be told, it's only been 10 minutes. I want you to put that away. Try as best as you can, and I want you to think about, for these next 30 minutes, 2 questions. They may be the most important questions you can ask today. They're relevant questions no matter how old you are. Here they are. Do you trust God? And can God be trusted? You need to ask those two questions whether you're 9 or 90. You may be 9 years old and you need to ask that question because there are things a 9-year-old will struggle with. Trying to figure out what you look like and what friends you have and how to get your homework done and what to do with fears you sometimes have. You have struggles at 9 and you have struggles of faith at 90. Your body falling apart and seeing the world the way you wish it wasn't. Whatever age you are, those are relevant questions, and every age in between. Do you trust God? And can God be trusted? Simple, straightforward, profound. No two more important questions you can think about today. Set aside all the noise, all the distraction, all the hot takes, all the other voices out there, and think about those questions. And that's what this passage is about. All along, as I read from Genesis 15, returning to Genesis after a spring break week and 2 weeks for missions week, here to one of the great chapters in all the Bible, Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward the heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in half. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. And behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. 2 questions. Do you trust God? Can God be trusted? The first question directs our attention to verses 1 through 6. You look at verse 1. The chapter begins after these things. What things? Well, the things of chapter 14, Abram's great victory over the eastern kings, the rescue of Lot, the routing of these superpowers, and then meeting this mysterious high king of Salem, the priest Melchizedek. After this, here's a new scene. The word of the Lord came to Abram. We have that twice in this chapter, only time we have that sort of language in Genesis. Abram, later in chapter 20, will be called a prophet, but here he's being introduced to us in quintessential Old Testament prophetic terms. The word of the Lord came to Abram. God initiates the conversation, and he says to Abram, I am your shield, and your reward shall be very great, verse 1. In other words, I will protect you, I will provide for you. And notice what he says first, fear not. Why might Abraham be afraid? It may be that he's afraid of the Eastern kings. He just routed this alliance, and maybe he's nervous that they're going to reform their alliance and they're going to find where he is and they're going to come back and seek their vengeance. Could be nervous, could be afraid. Maybe it's simply a fear at the presence of the Lord. That would make sense as God speaks to him. Perhaps the fear is that God's promises will not come true. Certainly, we're going to see that in just a moment, that he is wondering if all that God has promised is really going to come to pass. I certainly think it may include all three of those elements, but certainly the last. So quite rightly, God says to him, Abram, don't be afraid. Abram has seen some amazing stuff in his life. Chapter 12, he's there, a pagan in Ur of the Chaldees, and God announces to him, calls him to leave, and gives him the promise of sevenfold blessing. And then immediately that promise is threatened. First in chapter 12 with the famine, and Abram goes down. He lies about his wife, but the promise is invincible, and so Abram ends up leaving Pharaoh a richer man than when he came. And then the promise is threatened a second time when the herdsmen of Lot and the herdsmen of Abram don't have enough land to dwell in. Now Abram is more honorable. Lot, you pick first. He goes down to Sodom, bad choice. Abram gets the promised land, and at the end he's promised everything in the land, and that his descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. The third threat, the promise, is this alliance of the Eastern kings, and so his nephew Lot is captured, and Abram gets 318 of his fighting men. He rescues him. They pursue this great superpower, and they rout them. 3 times the promise has been threatened. 3 times Abram has seen the invincibility of the promise, and so he's already a great nation, and all those who curse him are being cursed. Abram has seen some amazing stuff. In fact, it seems like in politics, in his extended family, in battle, seemingly in everything, Abram is coming out on top. And yet, the thing that he no doubt wants more than anything else has not yet come to pass. In fact, with every passing week and month and year, it seems as if this promise will not be fulfilled. It is destined to fail. And so Abram says in verse 2, oh, Lord God, I still don't have a child. Have you noticed this is the first time in Genesis we have record of Abram speaking to God? Every other time God's speaking to Abram, but here we have record. Here's the first thing we know that Abram said to God, and we can understand why he might say it. I am continuing childless. You could literally translate, I am one who is walking stripped. I'm at my wit's end. I'm devastated. I have this servant, Eliezer from Damascus. He probably got this servant when he chased the Eastern kings up to Syria, and this was maybe part of the spoils. He said, this man right here, this foreigner in my midst, Eliezer from Damascus, he's my heir right now. Is this what you had in mind, Lord? Incidentally, some of you know this pain. It may look on the outside that everything in your life is going great. House, job, vacation, learning, honors, everything, but you don't have a child. Or you always carry with you the loss of a child. Or you have children who are struggling. I remember Tim Keller saying one time, once you have children, you will never be happier than your least happy child. Slight exaggeration, but there's a real truth in that. This is not a promise that you will have a child or that things will all turn out well for your children. This is a specific promise to Abram, but we see here the sort of experience that many of God's people have had. Everything seems to be going amazingly well for Abram, except for his family. God, you promised a child. The one thing nearest and dearest to my heart, and I have Eliezer of Damascus. Is that what you have in mind? And the Lord replies to him, you're right, Abram. That's not what I have in mind. Eliezer will not be your heir. You will have your very own son. In fact, just imagine what this must have been like. Abram presumably in a tent, and the Lord speaking to him says, I want you to go outside. Look up there. Look. Of course, they don't have any of the sky drowned out with city lights, just stars. Abram, I want you to count them. You wonder what Abraham thought, really? Yeah, go ahead, count them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How long do you want me to count? Keep counting. I can't count them all. That's the point. You see those stars? You can't count all the stars you see up in the sky. So shall your offspring be from your very own flesh and blood. Genesis is a big book about a lot of things, but it is nothing less than the story of promise after promise after promise. I love this line from Gerhardus Voss. God does not begin with working upon the inward psychological states of the patriarchs as though they were subjects for reform, an unbiblical attitude which is unfortunately characteristic of too much of modern religion. He begins by giving them promises. The keynote is not what Abraham has to do for God, but what God will do for Abraham. Then in response to this, the subjective frame of mind that changes the inner and outer life is cultivated. In other words, God doesn't come to the patriarchs and say, I got to clean up your life. I want to first shape something in you. He comes announcing big, bold promises. And this is a real doozy. This is an old man. He's just getting older. Now, most of us know the story, and so we know what's coming, and Sarai's going to laugh, but amazingly in their old age, they're going to have Isaac. It's great. But Abraham wasn't there yet. This was a hard thing the Lord was promising. Not hard for God, of course, but hard for Abram. Be like God coming to me, Kevin, you will run a sub-4-minute mile. Well, my fastest days, I was over a minute away from that. And the last minute, I think, is probably the hardest to shave off. And I'm not getting faster. In fact, by every passing month and year, this seems less and less likely, Lord. It's not like a promise you'll be, have $1 million in the bank and maybe you accrue little by little. We're getting closer. No, each passing year, this seems more and more impossible. You're going to have a child. You might as well say you're going to be the president of the United States. Or that may even be possible. No, you're going to be the Queen of England. Well, how is that going to happen? Even as an old man, Abram, you will have a child. And from you will come a great multitude. And Abram, already an old man and only getting older, hears this from the Lord's mouth. And he says, apparently, I trust you. You can do that for me. You will do that for me. Genesis 15:6 is one of the greatest verses in all the Bible, which is why the Apostle Paul makes so much of it. It's not that this is the first time that Abram has ever believed the promises of God. This is really the story and the posture and the attitude of his life. But here we have it again in specific reference to this promise, and he believed. Believe means to stand firm. The noun form of the verb is used in 2 Kings 18:16 with reference to the pillars or the doorposts of the temple. I will be steadied. I will stand firm. I will be confident. I will be like concrete in your promises.